From the mountains to the runways, GORE-TEX wasn't made for luxury streetwear, but somehow it took over. How did a material that was designed to survive the most intense weather environment become a flex in high fashion? We'll break down the brand's smartest marketing move, its cultural takeover, and why every brand wants to collaborate with it. How a technical fabric became such a staple piece in fashion, high-end sneakers, and $1,000 collections. We'll talk about the collaborations, the cultural relevance, and all this comes down on how you can implement GORE-TEX's marketing playbook into your own brand. We're first starting off with a strong foundation. GORE-TEX was always about quality, and quality in the sense that it is a technical innovation. It built its history on reliability, on being able to be this fabric that, once it gets wet, is able to help you breathe. So the way they do that is that the fabric has holes or membranes that are small enough that water doesn't get through, but big enough that air can get out. And on top of that, they have a DWR layer that repels water so that it makes that effect even better. And so they had always focused on this innovation aspect. So it's built its core as something that is relevant in a certain target market, which is people that are outdoors, people that are living life to the extremes. And to be associated with somebody living in the extremes is probably one of the best things possible for marketing. If you think Red Bull, if you think Arc'teryx, if you think North Face, these are some of the collaborations that have worked with GORE-TEX to improve its brand and also improve those brands as well. Now, how does this apply to you? If you consider what your core, unique value, quality, and what you stand for without all the hype, what do you bring to the table? And so the question is, how do you differentiate yourself with your core value proposition? Now, the example for GORE-TEX is a textile manufacturer. It's developed this technology that has this membrane that lets it be breathable when you're out getting wet. So people that are out skiing, out hiking in the wilderness, or for me personally, when I was riding through the jungles of northern Thailand, it was drenching. I was in my motorcycle, but I had my trusty GORE-TEX jacket that just kept all the water off of me. Meanwhile, my pants were getting wet, which didn't have GORE-TEX, but it was fine. That had quick drying technology, so it worked out in the end. But this was when I realized that GORE-TEX is the real deal. And so you need to consider what kinds of advantages that you have as a brand, whether it's personal or intellectual. A couple examples would be if you consider social status. Some of these brands elevate social status because when you wear it, like if it's a name brand, for example, it might symbolize to a certain group of people that you appreciate a certain aesthetic. Like if I were to wear an Arc'teryx beanie, then maybe the Gorp people would appreciate that and be like, oh, okay, this guy's one of us. If I'm wearing North Face, for example, there's also a certain demographic. Maybe if I'm in Japan, where North Face is really big, they might be like, oh, okay, this guy understands us. It also goes down to how this is styled as well. Maybe I'm wearing the North Face with the GORE-TEX Pro, whereas if I'm wearing North Face with the old XDR, a certain demographic might be like, hey, this guy is not really the fully committed outdoor person that he's portraying himself to be. Now, you could also consider technology, whether what your brand has, is it able to help the consumer get to a certain level or do something that they couldn't do before. For example, wetsuits that I have, I only wear Rip Curl wetsuits, sometimes Matus wetsuits as well, but Rip Curl wetsuits have established itself as a quality wetsuit brand, and so I always go back to it when I go and surf. Now, you could also consider what the experience is as you're wearing a certain brand. If you're sharing your stories as you're wearing a certain piece, for example, like the North Face Denali jacket, how that has history rooted in scaling all these magical, mystical, big mountains. And so it has this story, this back end that people can come back to and aspire to when they're wearing those pieces. And this is a lot of the marketing that North Face actually uses, which incorporates GORE-TEX in its technology, in its clothing as well. Now, next we have to consider the strategic collabs and borrowed authority. When I was first introduced to GORE-TEX, it was the North Face and Supreme collaboration, and with that jacket, they had GORE-TEX in it. Now, at the time, Supreme was a huge brand. Nowadays, it's not as popular as it was back then, but back then, if you had like a Supreme box tee, that would be major street cred for somebody that's into the streetwear fashion scene. But at the time, for me personally as a kid in Los Angeles, North Face didn't really have that big of a presence yet. But Supreme definitely had a major presence. And so what does GORE-TEX do now? It aligns itself with brands like Arc'teryx, North Face, Salomon, and recently, Aimé Leon Dore, which is probably one of the biggest like gate-kept brand, but it's also not really gate-kept because it's so popular these days. And so it's also gained this credibility in fashion, in outdoors brands, and in this certain lifestyle that people aspire to be or to do or to have. And so now it's branded itself as something that fits in with high-end luxury goods using one of the best textile manufacturers for tech fabric. And you can't even get GORE-TEX fabric unless they've authorized your brand to get their fabric. So what are some of the takeaways from this as a creator? That if you're a brand and you partner with the right type of people, the right sports, the right events, the right activities that is in your space, you can tap into the borrowed authority because, in a sense, being connected to these brands and entities give you authority. Now, actually, one of my favorite sneakers or teasers was recently the other day, Aimé Leon Dore just released a GORE-TEX and Aimé Leon Dore video teaser. We don't even really know what it's about, but it's just out there and released a few days ago. Now, next, let's talk about controlling the narrative. GORE-TEX has a huge emphasis on why its brand matters. If you go on the site, you will see the story behind it, the testing behind it, and that it's not just another PTFE textile manufacturer, because that technology is out there. It's been there for a while. But it goes through many rigorous training and testing of the product, and it's showing that to the consumer so that when the consumer sees it, they'll be like, all right, GORE-TEX is this brand that has pushed itself to beyond the limits of testing, of trying things out so that it's able to withstand the most extreme conditions. Now, the same thing could be said about Honda. Many times, Honda uses its engines and pushes it like a red line for hours and days just to test and stress test what these engines can do. So for GORE-TEX, for example, they would use extreme weather testing, extreme high performance testing, and even NASA astronauts use GORE-TEX technology. And if you follow like on their social media, their page, it'll show you the behind the scenes on how this is being developed. Which would lead me to the last thing, future-proofing your brand and staying relevant. GORE-TEX continues to innovate and show what they're doing, which is one of the biggest ways for brands and content and founders to show off and to tell the world that they are still relevant and show this behind the scenes. Now, for me, this is an evolution on the transparency movement that was happening in the 2010s. So in the 2010s, we would see a lot of brands that were doing direct to consumer. And essentially that is like, all right, we're skipping the middleman, we're manufacturing this, and we're selling it to you because now we have access to the internet. Now, the next step of that, which is where we're at now, is that these brands are creating something. They're showing the process behind it. They're creating this legitimacy. And then from there, they're selling to the end consumer with the proof that they have something that is good and valuable. And while they're doing this, there's strategic partnerships that they're doing to keep them in the limelight, such as using some of these top brands that are so popular these days, like how the GORPcore trend has blown up, and Arc'teryx using GORE-TEX material, North Face being used by some of the most extreme climbers, still using GORE-TEX, and they also showcase many athletes on their website using GORE-TEX technology. And even though they're at the top of the PTFE game, which I believe is polytetrafluoroethylene, it's basically Teflon on the pans that you have. So that creates that layer of just non-stickiness so that the water could go out. They are still continuing to innovate on the product that they have. And you could see that in the way that they showcase what they're doing on social media. Now, the takeaway for this is that GORE-TEX is a major brand but it has many of these strategies that it's doing to align itself with some of the key players in its space. So once you're creating something, whatever world you're in, are you creating something of value so that the people in the space, this community that you're working with, can see what value you have, connect with this value, and in doing so, has this borrowed authority that both ends win as well. GORE-TEX provides the most high-quality textile for performance clothing, and some of these top brands creating performance clothing for extreme athletes get to align itself with this company that is using the best material. So how do you do that for yourself as well? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you in the next video.